everybody. Thank you for coming to this meeting of the PF Warriors. Our program today is a very serious subject for everyone. It's how do we survive a serious chronic illness day to day. Ever since my husband was diagnosed, we have had the range of emotions, crazy emotions, more me than him, you know, with fear, anger, uncertainty, anxiety, and joy and hope. We met Bill Vick. And then, you know, you go through depression, then some relief, and then back to anger. So where I am, at least, I'm always cycling in these emotions, and it really does affect your daily life. It can be very hard for you to keep your head on straight. And this morning, I was just checking some of our postings, something that came on our Facebook page. Oh, I was going to read it. It's really funny. The 10 things you should not say to someone with a chronic illness. You can't be in that much pain. Stop being lazy and get a job. You just want attention. Your illness is caused by stress. No pain, no gain. It's all in your head. If you just get out of the house, you're so lucky to stay in bed all day. Just pray harder. But you look so good. I mean, that one, people, you know, and they mean well if they're saying, but you look so good. The other ones, I'm not so sure what they mean by those. But anyway, we hear all kinds of things. And so, how do you really consider not be depressed and angry? Well, we're going to find out. Dr. Mona Robbins from UT Southwestern is with us again today. We had her once before. She's fantastic. Dr. Robbins is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and a licensed psychologist from UT Southwestern Harold Simmons Comprehensive Cancer Center. Her expertise is based in an undergraduate degree in psychology from Howard University and a doctoral degree in clinical community psychology from the University of Illinois. Her additional postdoctoral fellowship in pediatric psychology and at Children's Medical Center in Dallas has aided in her development and understanding of psychological factors that impact medical condition management. Join me in welcoming Dr. Mona Robbins.
Well, good morning. Good morning. I'm going to move over this way because I'm tall so that everyone can see me somewhat. I want to say thank you to Baylor's Cancer Center for having me here, and a special thank you to the Pulmonary Fibrosis Support Group for inviting me back to speak again today. In thinking about what I wanted to share, I really wanted to consider how I could encourage those that are listening now. What information can I provide to you that can help you to leave here feeling as though you have one more gem to keep pushing forward? Whether that's for you as a patient or for a caregiver, to know that there's a little bit more that's out there for you to hold on. I'm going to share a little bit about what I do to give you some background. Now, in my work, I don't work specifically within pulmonary fibrosis. However, I am a cancer center psychologist. And what I do is I provide care and support and clinical interventions to our adult patients who have different types of cancer diagnoses. And what I'm going to share today, I believe, are transferable skills and information, because I often work with patients and their loved ones, their adult caregiving children and friends and family around how to instill hope when they feel like there's a lot of gloom there. So I feel like this is helpful for anyone who's managing a chronic or an acute illness. When many patients come to visit me, they've come through from possibly a referral from their physician, or maybe they have learned about services and are coming in to seek help. Some have just been given information about having a new diagnosis. Others may be in existing ongoing treatment. Some have been managing their health for years. or others are now coming to a point where they're seeking support for end-of-life concerns. So when people hear about the work that I do as a psychologist in this role, they often ask me, well, what do you say to your patients? What do you say to people who may now be facing a very large hardship or a very significant challenge for where they are in their lives? Well, others may wonder, is all of my work doom and gloom? I like to think differently, because what I do is I try to pull out some of that energy that's still left in order to give people a little bit of hope to push through. And many times people wonder, is my work so hard because of the beliefs and the ideas that they have about the diagnosis or ongoing healthcare management? Well, what I recognize is that my answer depends. It really depends on what the patient needs. It depends on the direction that they want to go in, what they hope to get out of service with me, and it's really collaborative. Because my helpful interventions are only as helpful as what the patient allows me to do, what they believe is going to be possible, and most importantly, what they're able to practice. Because you can learn so much from your providers, the supportive team members, the social workers, or whomever. But if you don't take that information, believe that information, and practice it when you leave, it can dissolve completely away. So in my field, I'm in the field of health psychology. Some have heard of it, others maybe not so much. There's a phrase that goes, where the head goes, the body does follow. And we know that there's an important connection between the mind and the body. So in health psychology, what we do is we focus in on that physical aspect. The physical, the biological, and we also understand how that psychological wellness overlaps with us. Because how you feel internally affects the mind and vice versa, okay? So thinking about how do we uplift you from your mind and your spirit in order to also help you push through any type of physical ailment that you might have. And I like to call this the head to heart. Many times we get so stuck on thinking about what's going on that we can intellectualize it all up in here. And we separate out from here in our hearts and the emotional piece of how it feels. Shelley just read a little bit about some of the things that you shouldn't say to someone who's dealing with a chronic illness. And one thing that comes up is, oh, it's all in your head. Or, you know, if you just change and stop thinking about it, you'll be able to get past it. Well, it's not that simple. We don't just have a switch that we can click and turn everything off. And so sometimes you need support and others to sit with you to help you practice to get through. The other thing I do is I try to work towards helping patients to heal. And healing can mean so many different things to different people. Because sometimes folks are looking for a particular cure, meaning that there's an absolute resolve of all issues that are there. But for this case, what I am suggesting healing to be is finding a place of peace and functioning that allows you to live a fulfilled life despite your situation or your challenges. And that's what I'm going to focus on for today, of that type of healing, and thinking about what that means for you individually. Now, while today, might feel a little formal, I have my little jacket on and everything, do know that afterwards, once we finish, I want to engage you in conversation. I'm more than willing to take some questions that you might have for me, so please do keep those in mind along the way. And if for need for clarification, you have a question, feel free to bring it up too, okay? The other piece too that I focus on is living and enjoying life. And I often ask folks, so how are you doing these days? What type of joy have you found in your day-to-day existence? Because what I do find is our identities, of which we all have many, tend to get shifted around, and then one ends up revolving so much that it gets to the front, and that's the one of patient. You may be a mother, a father, a daughter, a son, an aunt and uncle. You may be a caregiver, employee, or retiree. You may be a coach. But the one that tends to come up often now is patient. Why? Because you have to go to the doctor's appointments. You're constantly doing a follow-up. You have to go for surgeries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what people focus on, to where they forget to enjoy some of the life that is still there left to live. And then there's this disconnect between what you expected for yourself and now what you're dealing with. So I focus on resolving this frustration that you have. Now that life differs from the plans that you once expected for yourself. Does this make sense? Okay. Question. So does it help to stay positive? Folks will tell you optimism is amazing. Yes, optimism is great. It tends to help with reduction of stress. It tends to help with reduction of inflammation in the body. But to just suggest that you go for it and just be happy all the time, or that you just keep this positive, optimistic outlook all the time, is unrealistic. Because we all have our ups and our downs. Life will take us through a roller coaster. And to not acknowledge that is untrue. So I do try to challenge this idea of, okay, well, what does positivity mean to you? Is being positive being able to say, well, I'm having some bad things happening to me. However, I can look at this good thing over here. It's positive for you to be able to say, maybe out of 6 days this week, I didn't feel so great, but that one day I was able to get up and get moving was wonderful. That's positive for me. We really have to think about how do we reclaim positivity and where does that fit into the lives of ourselves as well as our caregivers. Because many times your family, and they are so well-intentioned, push you and push you to keep going because they're afraid. I meet with patients, their loved ones, and families and sit down and talk about what the plan everyone has. And often the family is afraid that if their loved one does not get up that day or does not keep moving, that they're going to completely stop. So what do? They push you and they push you. And some days you're like, look, I'm tired. I'm reasonably tired. And I just need to rest. It doesn't mean that I've given up. It doesn't mean that I don't want to try. It just means that I need a break. And I think that's where that conversation needs to be had on both ends. To realize that, hey, I'm there with you and I'm wanting to be positive, but we have to do this in a space that helps me to feel good. And I address this too because we hear a little bit in the literature about positivity and the helpfulness with dealing with health conditions, but sometimes we don't give people their actual true reality and helping them to function in that space. And that's where, sometimes people come to me and say, okay, what do you think you're going to do? You're going to wave your magic wand and make everything better. I know you're one of those psychology people. You get all up in my head, you're going to fix it, right? No. If I did and could, I would be a lotto winner. However, what I'm here to do is figure out what you find to be important for your life and to be a support for you to pull those pieces out together. So that's my work. So part of it, I'm going to go through and give you some general tips. So each of these titles that you see here are ideas of what I would like for you to take with you in terms of what can you do in terms of enhancing yourself or bringing this to someone else that you love. So one is building or maintaining a positive quality of life. Do we hear about quality of life sometimes? Have you heard of that? Quality of life enhancement? What is positive quality of life? So here's some definitions. So it's your overall well-being that can include positives and negatives of life. Quality of life can. The physical, your mental, your emotional, your social. So it's not just about what's going on in your mind and your feeling. It's all the things that you do. It's about the hobbies that you have or had. It's about the people that you surround yourself with. Now sometimes we surround ourselves with some toxic folks and we need to push them back, especially when we need to heal and rebuild. It's about our habits, our practices. Everything that makes up who we are helps us to enhance our positive quality of life so that we feel like we're living life in the way that we would like to. So the other thing I talk about is enhancing or preserving a positive quality of life. Because I like to believe that I'm not an expert of you, you are the expert of yourself. Because you've been living with yourself far longer than you have in terms of meeting me, right? So what I have to learn is, what is it that makes you go? What are some things you enjoy doing? What are some things that we can now start, enhance, and create, or bring back? And what are some things we can either continue that just have been hovering under the radar? I had a patient the other day who said, I appreciate you asking me what are some things I enjoy doing. Because he said he spoke to a member of his healthcare team and they said, well, do you like jigsaw puzzles? Maybe gardening would be nice. Have you considered taking up some crafts? And he said he just looked at them and said, I don't do any of that. That doesn't give me any joy. That's not fun for me. I enjoyed working on cars, really doing some things with my hands where I get dirty, but now I don't really have the stamina. More importantly, I don't have the strength. That's what I want to do. So I asked him, I said, well, let's think about that. What are some pleasurable activities that you can do that might mirror a little bit of it? How can you fix some things with your hands? And he said, well, his wife has some projects for him around the house, typical things that maybe he could tinker with. I said, how comfortable do you feel doing that? He said, well, maybe that might be better. Something I can actually sit in front of me, put on the table, sit down, maybe work on it in waves, a little bit at a time. When I get tired, I can push it to the side, take my naps in the afternoon like I normally do, and then, okay, I might feel a little bit better. Okay, great. Notice, trying to bring back something that you've already been doing and doing it in a way that's now more feasible for you, okay? But this might sound like, yeah, that makes sense, it's easy to do, but oftentimes, when we get to a point in our minds where we're stuck, it's hard to shift from there. And it's hard to think differently, and it's very hard to be creative mentally until we maybe provided some support in that way, as an example. So the other question I ask folks is, how do you spend your free time? What do you do leisurely? Think about that for yourself right now. How do you spend your free time? What does a Monday look like for you, a Wednesday? Do each of your days tend to look the same? Do you have a routine? Do you tend to go out for lunch with friends, maybe that one time a month or every week? What are you doing? Are you sitting around at home most of the time, watching TV, marathon watching on these different streaming channels, right? Thinking about how you're spending your time is so important, because what can happen is we start to feel like hamsters in a wheel, where every day is the same. Or like Groundhog Day, for those that remember that movie. Yeah, okay. Every day becomes the same day, becomes the same day. Take that and give it to anyone else, it becomes kind of mundane, a little boring. And so you have to think, at what point do I want to shift it up? I'm not saying something drastic. No one's saying to go to Six Flags, right? We're not saying to change it so much. But how can we shift it just a little bit in thinking about how your routine might be different? Engagement with friends and family. So some people will tell me, I love spending time with the grandkids. But depending on where they are in treatment, spending time with young children may not be possible. Why? Because they have a compromised immune system. Perhaps they just finished going through a particular procedure, surgery, or in a particular treatment, and they can't be around young ones who tend to have a lot of germs, or they tend to be really active and want to bounce all over you. So now they're kind of sad because they can't spend time doing the thing they once loved to do. How can they change that? Are there ways they can still engage with their grandchildren? You know, we have technology to where on your phone you can do anything you want. Call folks, order a pizza, check your email, FaceTime your friends, FaceTime your grandkids, bring them in. Taking pictures, exchanging pictures. One patient I have who's 75 years old said, you know what, I learned how to do those emoji things. I said, what? He says, I exchange emojis with my granddaughter. He said, I'm not really one for texting because that just takes too much. His dexterity is a little limited. But he says, every day she'll send me an emoji. And I'm supposed to respond back with an emoji too. And sometimes I give her an emoji to let her know how I'm feeling or what I'm doing that day. And that's the way that they keep in contact with each other. The other two is thinking about the folks that you do keep around you. As I alluded to about the toxicity, some we have that are wonderful, supportive, and been with us for years. Others we have aren't so great and have been with us for years. And they get to a point where everything they say either reminds you of things you don't want to talk about, or what they talk about just isn't in the same space that's helping to uplift your mood. It takes a strong act of courage to push back and say, I am going to protect my space. And to say, yes, maybe we can talk, but not right now or not in this way. How do we then think about the energy that we are keeping by the people that we are allowing to be in our space? Another conversation that tends to come up with me and my patients is around, well, who do you tell about your diagnosis? Or if you do share, how much do you share? Some people may feel uncomfortable letting others know for various reasons: privacy, shame, embarrassment, or perceptions that they're now burdens on their friends and loved ones, and so they keep it to themselves. Or they have that really nosy family member who tells everybody. And you just don't need that to happen. Just let me tell them first. So we talk about that. And I say, here's an example. Just like salutations and greetings. There are some people you meet or some people you greet and you give them what? A hug. There's other people you meet and you give them a handshake. Depending on how you're feeling, might give them a high five. And other folks, they just get that wave. Same way in dealing with your health. Everyone doesn't necessarily deserve nor need to have all information about you all the time. The other thing about sharing information and providing updates is that it gives people insight to what's going on regularly. And for some, maybe that's needed, or for others, they appreciate that. With the growing age of social media and technology, some people will document their progress through different pages and storylines on Facebook. But then when it stops, then the questions become, well, what happened? What's going on? How come you didn't tell me? I didn't know that happened. How come you didn't? It goes on for days and days. So then you have to think about, okay, well, how much access of myself do I want to give to others? Because sometimes they get comfortable, and or maybe you just need your space. So I bring that up too, because that can be a source of stress for some people. I'm not sure if anyone's ever experienced it or known it. Oh, I see some nods. But that can also be a source of stress to think about. So consider how you engage with your loved ones. It doesn't mean that you don't appreciate them and that you don't want them around to help you. And caregivers, they love you. But sometimes people need a little space to be able to build up and to have the energy to keep going with you the way that you would like them to. So the other thing is thinking about your activity, your social groups, or your community. For some, people are involved in different religious or spiritual groups, organizations, or maybe they've been involved with community groups, and now they're not able to do the same things they once were able to at first. For others, they're able to change this activity to where they have philanthropic donations of sorts, or maybe they cut down on what they could do. I have someone who's a part of a large gardening society, and she shifted her role from direct hands-on care to now helping with some of the clerical aspects because she doesn't have to be there in person and can now do this work from home, for example, on her laptop or her computer. So there's still a way that she's finding joy because she's able to interact with this community, but she's doing it in a different way. So thinking of what activities have you done before that you can now shift so that you're still able to do them. And the last part is perceptions of ability. This is a big one. And I think this is where it does come to the mentality of what you are able to do and what you feel like you should be able to do. And that's the disconnect that brings people to a point where their mood tends to drop down. At this age, at this stage, with this level of education, I should be able to do X, Y, or Z. Without realizing that now you're in a different situation, not giving yourself that space to know that things have shifted, or thinking that now nothing can be done. The absolutes, the complete opposite of saying, oh, now I can't do anything. Well, is that necessarily true? Are there some things that you still can do? Which brings to this feeling of absence of control. A lot of times when I'm working with my patients, there's frustration around, oh, I was the one that was supposed to be taking care of the household. I was the one that was supposed to be making sure that the kids were okay. And now I have to rely on someone else to do this for me. That control is gone. I have to go to these appointments. I have to wait on the lab results. I have to wait for somebody to call me back to tell me when the next appointment is. Ugh, that absence of control. I can't drive like I used to. All these areas come to this piece of, well, what can I control? What am I able to do and what can I do? I'll talk more about that. So identifying patterns to regain control. So this is something I think is helpful for everybody, regardless of what you're going through. But one is tracking your schedule. When I asked you, how do you spend your free time? I wanted you to think about, what are your Mondays like, your weekends like, your weekdays like? But part of it is to start noticing how you're feeling, how you're functioning, and where you have your highs and your lows. So if this is related to maybe not feeling so good, figuring out what that not so good is, and that's usually my role of pulling out, what does good mean? Good means fatigue, good means sadness. What is that good? So tracking your schedule, noticing, okay, well, on certain days of the week, I tend to not have a lot of energy in figuring out what's going on there. Or I notice that on the weekends, my daughter-in-law comes over and she tends to want to talk to me a lot. Before I know, I look up and 2 hours have passed and I'm exhausted. Goodness, this happens every week. Noticing that. I find that when I have to go in for this particular treatment or this particular procedure, I get a little anxious. I'm not feeling so great anymore. Is there some anxiety behind that? Am I concerned about what's going to happen? Do I need to talk to someone about it? Start to track your schedule. Start to track and notice how you're feeling. This is also good for emotions. Now, sometimes we tell people, hey, you should journal, write things down. And people think, yeah, okay. Well, first that's going to take some time on how to do it. First I got to go get something to write it in. Then I got to get a pen. Then I got to remember to actually write it down. Jeez. But you know what? It's really hard to think retroactively about what happened. I can ask you right now, what did you eat 3 days ago? Go. You probably don't remember, because after a couple hours, 72, it takes a little longer to remember that. That's why it's good to keep track of what's going on, because it helps you to identify patterns of what's happening. You can also monitor some of your symptoms. So you might be telling your provider that I am feeling X, Y, and Z. Or after this treatment, I don't have a good response. And they'll ask you, so what happened before that? Do you know any reason for it? And you might be sitting there, I don't know. This is why tracking is helpful. The other reason why it's good is because it helps you to figure out how you might be able to go back and enhance that quality of life and how you can engage. Because people will say, well, I'm usually tired. I have some patients who take about 3 to 4 naps a day because they're so fatigued. They get up, get out the bed, brush your teeth, maybe go have a little cereal, tired, need to go back to sleep. Get back up, want to do something in the afternoon, tired. So then you have to figure out, okay, if I don't have that much energy, where do I notice my lulls to be? Where do I notice my points of energy to be? And how can I then insert some type of activity in between it? Some people may not have a fatigue concern. Maybe it's about movement, mobility, or even just movement in the body, thinking about where that's a problem and thinking about what other things can you do to substitute it. This can come from tracking and paying attention this way to help you re-engage and get back active within life. It's like finding your good spots and noticing where they are and riding that wave when it comes. Because like in ocean, we talk about the waves, you rise, and eventually, we have crashes against the rocks. That's true. But when that wave is there, ride it for all that it's worth. And there's times when there's going to be a pattern that you might be able to tell with your body, your highs and lows, that help you for where you can insert yourself. Does that make sense? Okay. So when it comes to clinical interventions, for those of you who might have the scientific background and the scholarly aspirations, I don't want to disappoint you without sharing a little bit about this part. So what do we do as psychologists? Well, many of us do have information from empirically supported treatments, and there are specific interventions that we utilize in our therapy sessions. Now, I may not present it as such, because all that language becomes just gibble-gobble when you hear it. So let me just tell you about a couple of the types of activities and techniques that are used. One is called activity pacing. Have you heard that phrase? Life is a marathon and not a sprint. You're right. What does that mean? That means that sometimes you have to take things slowly and know that over time, with continued perseverance, you reach this goal as opposed to running quickly towards it. Activity pacing is around the same idea of recognizing that you have to work with what you got. Think of your body having a full tank and you're able to produce and move as best as you can. And over time, that tank starts to get lower and lower, and depending on your car and how hot it is outside and how much AC you got pumping, it's pulling and dragging and trying to go until you're able to fill it back up. The body can do the same thing. When you have used up most of your energy, it's really hard to be focused, to be present, and to be interested. So when you're managing a health condition, this is a big piece. So we talk about activity pacing. So with that whole tracking, it's about thinking of how you can modulate what you're giving out so that you're able to maximize what your body can keep inside. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's what it's called. The fancy term of it is activity pacing. The other is behavioral activation. We tell you get up and just go. You want to try to do something different? Get up and just move it. Why? Because sometimes the body has to go, and then the feelings and the thoughts just run behind and catch up later. Think of a time when you may have wanted to go to an activity, visit with a friend, do something, you're like, oh, I just don't feel like it, or I'm just gonna wait until I feel like doing it, and then I'm gonna do it. If you wait until you feel like it, chances are you're gonna be waiting for a while. So the whole premise behind this is to identify some type of activity or event, get your body up, get your body moving, and then figure out, okay, how does that feel? I challenge people to do this because when we get stuck hard. And then all that does is reconfirm that I can't do something without even trying it. So with support, I try to encourage patients to do something different and to actually go out there and then be able to come back and share a little bit about what that experience was like. Because many times we have given up here before we even try. Going back to the statement of where the head goes, the body does follow. And the last piece of intervention is cognitive restructuring. So folks are sometimes familiar with the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and what that means. So when you're trying to help with getting over feeling down, and for those of you that may have experienced histories of depression or anxiety or have loved ones or family that have, some of the work that goes in helping to change that is changing the way that you think. How we think affects how we feel, which in turn affects our behaviors. It's like a whole process. And it can start with one of those three and reverse back in either direction. So what we do is we try to get a sense of how you feel about day-to-day life. If there's complete absence of hope and belief, well, what leads to that? Or where does that come from? Is it that you're not able to do anything at all, for example, or are you able to do something, but we have to modify it and adjust it? I constantly hear people say, well, I don't want to burden, I don't want to get in the way of, I don't want to trouble somebody. Not recognizing that the family is actually wanting to be of assistance. And those conversations don't ever come up. So instead of asking for the help, people sit back and never ask and never do and never try. So how can we reframe the issue? By sometimes first having a conversation about it and getting at what's underneath it. Does anyone have an understanding of that? Yeah. So it is in our head to the extent that we can sometimes switch these ideas of what's real because we've sat on it and we thought about it for so long that we just feel that we can't overcome. And that can also come from spending a lot of time by yourself. For many patients who've had to stay in hospital or tend to be away from friends and family because of their illness, you kind of have a lot of time to think and mull things over and over and over in your head to where it can develop some worry thoughts or thoughts that, I'm not really sure how to get this going. And instead of sharing this with someone else, you keep it to yourself. Because then after a while, you start thinking, well, no one's going to understand this, or I keep thinking this, and it must be bad. And then you don't get support in having a different outlook for how to handle it. So that can happen. Now, another piece is mindfulness for stress reduction. People heard of the field, the technique of mindfulness? It's something that's becoming very big, but it's been big for centuries. And it's really becoming big because it's helping us to understand our internal processes to help deal with distress and help ease and calm the body. So that's why I have that picture. I like to think that picture looks kind of serene. Sitting there, yeah, everybody can kind of relate to that. And thinking about pictures, we also use guided imagery. Even in times where you feel like your body can't move, if you're blessed enough still, the mind can. The mind is a place, too, to help you find some type of peace. Guided imagery exercises will sometimes involve sitting still and allowing the mind to do what it does best, which is think. Let's do an exercise. If you feel comfortable, I would like for you to sit back now and close your eyes. Get very comfortable in your seat. If you choose not to close your eyes, I would like for you to find a spot on the wall and fix your gaze to that location. During this activity, I would like for you to pay attention to the sound of my voice. As you rest in your seat, I want you to sit back as comfortably as possible, noticing your body and where it's located in your space. What we're going to do is a body scan. And we're going to imagine that we have a warm ray of light that is starting at the very top of our heads. The ray of light is at the top of our heads, and it's going to slowly scan our bodies. Everything it touches, it begins to soothe and smooth. The light begins to slowly slide down the front of our face, of our forehead, to the top of the bridge of our nose, past our eyes, soothing down the sides of the face and lips, feeling an overall warm but comforting sensation as we continue to ease down into our seats. The ray of light follows down past our neck, rolling over our shoulders, down our arms, embracing with comfort and care as we continue to soothingly move down the middle of our chest, stomach, slowly pushing down, easing away all discomfort and distress. As this ray of light continues, I want you to imagine a beautiful space, any space at all. For you, it could be at the ocean with water, a wonderful sunrise, sunset, beautiful flowers, blue sky, light, any image that you can recall that gives you peace and comfort as the ray of light continues to gently push down your body, past the lower half, soothing past your legs. You visualize this space, the feelings that it evokes for you, how you feel inside. The ray of light continues to ease down, down, past your knees. You settle more into your chair, exhaling softly down your feet to the floor, releasing everything stressful and tense. Slowly, you twinkle your fingers, tinge sides of your body. Open your eyes. For those not asleep, just take a moment. Notice your body. Notice how it feels. Think of where your mind went. Think of how easily you were able to follow my voice, or you were able to notice an image when asked. Also think about how challenging that could have been. I don't automatically assume it's easy, because what we also know is that people who have high levels of anxiety or pain have a very challenging time sitting still and going through guided imagery or relaxation exercises. That's another reason why I share this, because it can be helpful. And imagine if I had soothing music in the background, instrumental, smooth jazz or Mozart, or butterfly sounds, whatever sounds butterflies make, which I usually do. I have very gentle music as I do this, how that could feel. You too could do this exercise yourself at home. You could put on some music of your choice, and you can sit back and allow that wave to take over your body. There's free online links for guided meditation, relaxation, progressive muscle relaxation exercises. But the other reason why I bring up the side of maybe that didn't feel good to you is that we have to tailor our approaches to people for what works for them. And so while mindfulness and meditation is great for others, it might be something different. So we have to figure out then what else is good. We know that anxiety tends to dwell in spaces that remind us of the past and what else? The future. Because we get anxious, we get nervous, we get apprehensive, and we worry about what happened, what was, or what might be. When you think of health, that's where anxiety tends to dwell. On how things used to be, or what's going to come. And when we have our energies focused so much in those two areas, it squeezes us in to where the now and the present is this small and harder for us to focus on. That's where mindfulness becomes helpful. Because what it does is that it helps to enhance the awareness of the present moment. So when I was talking about love, living life, and enjoying it, I'm speaking some truth in that you have to find what is your present state and how can you enjoy the space that you're in, regardless of how long that's going to be. None of us know how long we're going to be here on this earth. But what we can do is appreciate the time that we currently have now. In this, we suspend judgment of our thoughts and our feelings. We know that thoughts about thoughts, they're there. They're like bubbles that are coming past and they're floating by. Think of them as balloons with strings on them. And they become more of a reality or more significant when we pull them down. These thoughts can go by, and we can have them. We can be upset, we can be sad. I have patients who express passive suicidal ideations to me more times than you would think because of the agony or the concern that they have about their prognosis. It doesn't mean that they're going to act on them, and they'll tell me that because they are these thoughts. Through this, you can engage in all your senses, whatever that may be, to be able to recognize yourself as a whole and to learn to appreciate the can-do of yourself, what is possible and what is able for you to do now. This is where I have the facing reality with intention. And a lot of these themes and these topics that I'm sharing with you, yes, it comes from what we know of research, but a lot of this is from anecdotal information from the patients I work with. Because as much as I teach and provide and support, I learn too. I learn what others are telling me and what they find to be helpful. And it's important for me to learn and to take hold of that and to use that to be helpful to them as well as other people. Something that came up before with the facing reality, but doing it with intention. So one is noticing your current abilities, even with limitations. Notice what's still possible, what you're able to do, because we can so quickly forget that. Or others can remind you so much of what you can't do, or maybe they overcompensate, do everything for you, to where you feel like you don't have a space to do for yourself. Releasing some of the unrealistic expectations and comparisons. We can often have really high bars for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that, with certain goals. But we have to really think, is setting this particular goal helping me or is it hindering me? And at what cost? And then the comparisons, either comparing yourself to your former self of when, or comparing yourself to another patient. I have that come up a lot. Well, you know, I've gone through this treatment. I've heard other people say that it really doesn't make them feel as bad, but it's making me feel terrible. Something's wrong with me. Why me? Can't compare yourself to somebody else. You don't know that person's background history, their additional ailments. You don't necessarily know what type of treatment and intervention they have that might be different from your own. Everybody's body responds differently to all sorts of procedures, but then that comparison factor comes up, and then that again creates that discomfort. But it's also important to establish some goals and track that progress. No matter how big or how small, I think it makes sense to have something to look forward to. Going back again to what does your routine look like? One homework activity idea is, between now and next session, I want you to engage in a pleasurable activity. Doesn't matter what. But I want you to go out and find something that you enjoy, and I want you to come back and I want us to have a conversation about it. I want you to share with me. What does that do? Well, one, it gives you something to identify. Another is going to give you something to actually do and complete. And then it gives you something to come back and share with me. Now, maybe you're able to find something, maybe you can't, but either way, information is given. One, whether or not you're able to find something, and if you were, wow, can we continue this now that you found it? The other is, if you couldn't, what got in the way? What stopped you? What was challenging? If it was help, makes sense, share. Tell me more about it. But what is it that is getting in the way of this piece, and how can we provide support for you? Often I will intervene on behalf of my patients. I consider myself a liaison of sorts, where I've noticed that either a connection with communication is lacking or need for additional supplies. And so I'm able to contact team members. I've sent messages out to providers, surgeons, etc. So that's why I tell folks to also utilize your support team. Because maybe one person can't see something or they don't get it, but another person will. And they can help to fit together and close some of those gaps that do come up. And celebrate the small victories. I won't point you out, but yes. Remember I said to someone, I was going to talk about celebrating small victories. No matter what they are. You got to treat yourself, as my mother says. Treat yourself. Sometimes. She says, as hard as you work, so should you play. As hard as you take care of yourself and others, you should also take care of yourself. We don't focus on self-care enough. Maybe you were able to get to an appointment and you thought you weren't going to make it. How do you celebrate that? Maybe you completed a procedure. How do you celebrate that? There's ways to celebrate these small victories. To have these moments of joy and connection with yourself and others that are around you. But we have to recognize the need to do it and actually go out, push ourselves, and do it. Behavioral activation. And once you do, then step back and say, wow, how'd that feel? Felt pretty good. Something to keep in mind. The other piece is living a life with purpose. So, finding meaning in life now. We all kind of think about, well, one day I'm going to get to that point when, or I might feel like this later. Well, why not find it now? Why not now? Why not consider what it is that gives you enjoyment, but more importantly, how you find purpose in yourself? With doing this, I often engage in an activity of reflection on life, where I might go back and think about a person's successes in their past history, all their life's accomplishments. And sometimes in end-of-life concerns, this is something that comes up in legacy building, thinking of all that has been achieved instead of all that's now lost. And for some people, they might say, well, I'm not really sure, or I don't feel proud of the life that I lived. I don't really know if thinking about my past is going to make me feel any better. Well, what about those lessons that's learned from life's challenges? Because I'm sure many of us have one or the other, if not both. What are some things that you have now learned that can change the way that you handle situations? And this, in turn, is about thinking about legacy. And this does come from those who are maybe in palliative care or hospice, which are two different things, but thinking about legacy building and also how you can share information with your loved ones, particularly with like children, etc. And this is a topic that does come up, and oftentimes is helpful to discuss. But just like anything else, such as like life insurance, etc., it doesn't mean the end is nigh. It just means it's information that you're preparing and developing. Okay? Just like people can have life insurance for a long time, this is something that still can be developed at any stage and point. That's something else that comes up with family members is that, oh my goodness, they're thinking about their will. They're talking about their legacy. They must have given up. Not necessarily. Sometimes reminding yourself of all the good, of all that you've done, helps to give you a little bit of spark and motivation to keep pushing on. Or maybe it helps you to think about, well, I've been able to be such a help and resource to my community before. There's still ways that I can contribute. How can I do it now? Okay? So there's different ways in which this information can still be hopeful. But most importantly is remembering that there is still life left to live. If you're still here and you're still breathing and you're still moving, there is life left to live. So how are we going to live it? And how can we take advantage of living in this moment now, outside of the worry about what was and what might be coming down the road? And then encouraging our loved ones too. to focus on living with intention. And through all this, I think the other question that will come up is, what can we learn from this experience? Many patients will tell me, there's a lot that I actually have learned from this. There are people that I've met come into groups, going to the hospital, meeting their support teams, relationships that have been developed and created that have now changed me in a way that I hadn't even expected. Granted, not under the circumstances I would have chosen, but in a way that I would not have expected and appreciated. And then thinking about the resilience that gets developed, goodness. The resilience and the strength that you see in yourself and those around you, from what you have to go through, and noticing that, and sometimes saying, it's hard, but giving yourself that pat on the back like, and I'm pushing through. Insight can be gained. Oh, so the oldest patient that I've had has been 84. I worked with kiddos as young as 2 up to 84. And I remember her telling me, she said, "You think it's too old for me to learn something new?" I said, "No, I don't think so. I think there's still things that can be learned, taught, developed." Part of this was insight. She was developing more insight into how she handles challenges. And the reason why her diagnosis was so challenging is because she said, I'm stubborn. I don't want nobody to help me. Never had anybody help me all my life. And now people need to help me and I don't want them to help. And I laughed because we would laugh about that and figure out, okay, well, what's behind it all? And then we were able to have that longer conversation about life, being the eldest, 7 siblings, needing to take care of all, feeling like if someone else came and took care of it, she would lose control. She said, okay, maybe I'm controlling. How do I relinquish some of that, or how can I contain some of it to now get the help I need? I'm no longer 25. She was 84. You're at a different place in your life developmentally. Your needs are different. Having that conversation and doing it in a space where she felt safe and could trust, so that we can work for the betterment. And encouragement given to others in your cause. There may be other people who are motivated by you. You ever get that? People will say, goodness, the strength that you're displaying has just given me so much encouragement. I don't think you even recognize it. I see we have additional youth in the room, and for them to be able to see and notice and pay attention to what's going on, it does make a difference and it matters. You might not recognize it, but over time, maybe you will. And then for anything else, developing memories and reflecting upon this. So like I talked about the legacy building too, memories that are regained from reflection of what you've learned in going through this process. So as I think about self-care, because it's so important to me, I think there should be some balance there. Ask yourself, do you often give yourself this gift? Do you even give yourself the gift of compassion, just alone? To say, okay, I can't do it all, I can't know it all, I can't be everywhere, but at least I'm going to try, and I'm going to seek out those who I think can be in my corner to be supportive of me to do so. So the whole part about the title of this talk, about making it work despite uncertainty, is that we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know, and because of that, it makes us so uncomfortable. But what can we do despite it all? So what I've shared today, I think and I hope is helpful for you. If not for you, maybe for someone else that you can pass along the way. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here, and I am welcome to take questions. Thank you.
I have one over here to start with.
Yes.
I guess it's kind of like a communication question, but it sort of came up when we were talking earlier today with communicating with doctors. We had one of Scott's doctors that really wouldn't listen to me, and even if I was able to get in a question, instead of answering me, he'd look at Scott and give the answer. And it was so frustrating because I'm the one who does all the internet searching, and I come with a list of questions. finally, I just said, here, Scott, here are my questions you asked me. And I would have liked to have found a way to engage him, this doctor, in a conversation who seemed slightly hostile to me. I mean, hostile might not be the best word, but I know that other people have kind of had these situations before, and I'm not sure how to handle it.
Okay, so the question, if I understand, is that about communication. So you go to an appointment with a provider and you're the caregiver that's there, and you have been just as involved and knowledgeable about all of the information, and you feel that the provider is talking directly to maybe the patient in the case and not really including you in that whole conversation. That does come up, and I've heard people talk about that often. And I think that comes from, one, is that some providers, from their standpoint, having worked a lot with the physicians, they're wanting to engage the patient. They want to make sure that they are the ones to be able to provide information. They're doing like a system of checks and balances. And in some instances, caregivers end up getting so excited or providing so much information, or the anxiety is so intense that it ends up derailing from the conversation. And so I think some people try to just focus in on the patient because they don't want us to go elsewhere. Now that's a provider's individual style thing. But if you find that that is happening, I think it's fair to bring that up in a way, to actually stop and say, I just noticed. I love that as an observation point. I do that with anything. I've noticed that, in this conversation, I have had some questions. Usually I'm helpful in, taking care of most things, but I feel a little excluded from the conversation, okay? Or I did have some additional questions that I wanted to bring to your attention. I believe my husband feels that it's okay too, getting that acknowledgement, and I wanted to ask you directly. Has that happened? Where you've been able to kind of call that out?
Well, no, I haven't done that at all. I just gave Scott the questions. I said, well, you ask him, obviously he's not going to talk to me. So I actually have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about that part of it this day, but Scott likes him so.
Shelley, you're just toxic.
I've heard that before, but anyway.
But that's where it can come from. I know, and I've seen it where either the caregiver will take over the conversation, and so I think sometimes people are they're anticipating it and trying to cut that off. In your case, it may not be the case, and then they're just focusing on the patient. And other times to where they just completely leave them out, and this is actually the person who's taking care of the patient most of the time, so you do want to include them. So again, I think it's stylistic in that provider, but if it does come up, I think it's fair to, bring up that observation point.
Has anybody else had trouble communicating with doctors or others?
And before I take this next question too, even if no question right away, what is some people's reaction to this information? Pretty positive? Helpful? Okay? Okay. So we have that question, and then I'll start coming into the audience, okay?
Here's yeah.
Okay. So we don't want to push, but we don't want to limit our loved ones. And some days their needs may be different from the next. So what way can we ask what's needed from them without being intrusive? Good question. Well, one is to ask. And I share that not to be, smart aleck or anything, but because I find that going along with the theme of communication is that our communication lines can get broken down, especially when we're dealing with a lot of stress and constant doctor's appointments. There's a lot of assumptions that end up being made where we just assume that someone knows what's going on, to where we don't stop and we don't ask. So one piece is that I say is asking what people need, honestly, and then trying to figure out if you're following in suit with what they need. Because I can see sometimes when caregivers will ask what someone needs, they might provide for them that thing, and then a couple things more to where the person feels a little smothered, okay? So being consistent with that, you're providing what someone is requesting or needing, and that you're not going over the top. The other thing is maybe having an agreement for some points of check-in or understanding of what the person, the patient is able to do. So you might say, I want to help you with, getting dressed and put it on your pants and put on your shoes, get you in the car. And they might say, guess what? You can help me with getting dressed. Pick out 3 pair of pants and I get to pick out 1. I'll put them on myself and I'll get my shoes on and we can get in the car. Honestly, had conversations all the way down to that, to where what you're doing is you're allowing that person to have some agency over what they're going to wear. Now, you pulled out some of the clothes, but now they have choice. Do you see that piece there? Where you're trying to give people a little bit of access to still being in charge of what's going on. So sometimes it can get to that extreme level. The other is you do want to push. You want to push, you want to say, I want you to stay active, I want you to get up, I want you to get out. But maybe you need to have a conversation about what that activity is going to look like. Maybe it's about either spending time with folks or being involved in the activity, but finding out from them what it is that they might want to do and maybe the frequency of it. Because your idea of involvement may be either a lot more than they had in mind or not. And I often see inconsistencies with that too. To where someone may say, well, I figured you should be up and you should be out of the bed and sitting in the living room at least, 5 days out the week. And the person says, well, my energy, I don't have that. So if I get out 3, then we're doing good. And so I think that conversation does need to be had, and many times it's not. To where you do have to break it down and be that specific. We can't just have these assumptions that we know what we're talking about. And I think that's what leads to frustration. So I saw a hand over here.
All right, well, first off, thanks for everything. Really, everything you talked about, I kind of try to follow along. I was diagnosed in 2014. Some of us, though, are a little competitive, and you start tracking, and the next thing you know, you're tracking yourself into more than you can actually do. So, I use the apps to track my mileage and everything, so what I'll do is I'll just overdo it and then I'll be down 2 weeks. Just till I can't even hardly get out of bed or anything. It takes me a week or two, and then the frustration with that gets added to that. And then of course my wife's like, are you okay? Are you okay? And so I don't know how to say it really, other than the fact that I tend to do, if I'm tracking it on that crazy app, and I'm tracking every day what I'm doing, well, the next day I want to do more. The next day I want to do more. And if I do less, it's like, oh shit, what's wrong? Sorry. But what's going on here? Because I'm slacking off. So I have this, I'm a bad dude, I did this, and then the following, I got, oh man, I slipped and I'm going to die tomorrow, and then you know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Because I measure everything, and I've always done that. So it's a kind of up and down thing. I don't know how to say that.
Okay. So if I can, it sounds like you're saying you're tracking your activity, and you described yourself as being competitive.
I am.
Okay. You use the word, not me. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so you get to a point where you start noticing all of your activity to where now you're comparing yourself against what you did before and what was, and having to keep up with that. Okay. So going back to a little bit of what I talked about before was a little bit of the activity pacing, number one, because you said sometimes you just do so much to where you pull yourself all the way down to now your tank is empty.
It does.
So it sounds that you're already tracking and noticing that at certain points of activity, you end up using all your energy. So that's where you need to have a reserve. So if you keep repeatedly going through this pattern of using all this energy and getting down, that's showing you some information that perhaps there's going to be a space where you might need to pull back. That tracking alone is probably good. So when you say you're tracking your mileage, you're tracking all the things that you're doing. So it's not just about noticing what I'm doing, I did this, I ran this errand, etc. But how do I feel? So it's the activity, it's the thought, it's the emotion, those types of tracking, it's the energy. And then noticing what is changing because of the activity that you're involved in. So you're probably doing more than your body is wanting to do. And you might have to just reserve some of it so that you can have that marathon and not that sprint.
That's my mind. My mind keeps telling me, if I'm laid up in bed, it's like guilt. Well, you should be out there doing something.
Yep. Those shoulds and those musts will get us all the time. So he said that his mind is the one that tells him, well, you should be doing this, you should be moving. That goes back to those thoughts and those cognitions. How do we change that? Okay, I should be up and I should be moving around and running all these laps. But given the fact that I have this limitation here, I might have to adjust this. And that's what we're trying to practice to change how the mind is thinking. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you
Just
for that.
doesn't it have to get back to the idea of setting a goal for yourself, and is it a realistic goal?
Correct, setting goals that are realistic.
If your goal is maybe to just to enhance your wellness and have more energy, my goal is to do the minimum amount of work basically to just maintain our well-being. Do other things.
So it's about setting a goal that is realistic and makes sense for your given situation. That's all I can hear before I come back to you. Someone over here?
Thank you so much. We really appreciated everything you said. But I do want to just make a comment about what he said, because that exact same thing happened to us when we started tracking walking. Every day was like a little bit more, and she felt bad, or I really felt bad if we didn't quite make what we made the day before. But you made me think maybe we'll just develop a baseline based on what we noticed, and any positives over that baseline, we'll use them for credits when we don't do as much. Like, okay, well, we have a balance. We met our baseline and we can feel good, or, you know, just leave it at that.
Absolutely. So thinking about the progress. So if you all heard the question about, and I see the hands, if you're moving forward and making progress, and that usually will get you excited. You're like, yes, this is successful. I want to keep going. So even the idea behind like exercise weightlifting, folks don't get to lifting 500 pounds overnight. They picked up a couple weights. They got to like maybe 50, and they did 50 for a couple sets before they even moved up to 75 before they moved up. So what happens is you have to go to a certain point, get there to maintain it, pay attention and notice how the body feels before you increase or decrease it. But what we're quick to do is we want to add more. And then when you keep adding more, you didn't even give that point of check-in to notice how the body was responding, and now you've overdone it.
Yes. And also, my original question was what you mentioned about family, like sharing with family the extent of the illness or like the prognosis or anything. What do you usually tell your patients to help them uncover what they'll feel comfortable sharing? Like, it may be different for different family members, but how do you help them think through, how will I tell my family members? Or how will I share this with others?
So the question is about how to work through the process of disclosing information about your medical status and to whom, right? So it's going to vary. So number one is I try to talk about the feelings behind sharing. So I need to understand what is it about sharing or not sharing that's a concern. Is it about fear? Is it about guilt? What is really driving it? And getting to the bottom of that. Because if it's about fear that if I tell this information, people are going to get worried that things are going worse, then that's going to have a different reaction. So the question is, how much of that is true for you, and how do we address what's going on internally? And maybe it's not necessarily true, and we can share. If there's an actual truth that if I tell this information, then it's going to get spent around and twisted, and everyone's going to find out, then maybe we don't need to share this information or with that person. So it's really kind of case-by-case dependent. And then the other part is about who you do tell, because you might need people who are close to you, who are listed on your PHI, designated individuals on your chart, for which the provider has to call in case of emergency, and other folks that just need to know to be able to send you well wishes, right? So we have to figure out how close you're going to keep certain people and deciding on what information you give. Does that help? Okay. And that's all your hand? Yes. And I'll come back to you too.
A couple things. First, I wanted to thank you. This was excellent.
Thank you.
Two, I'm a caregiver with my husband is a 2-year survivor as of this week of a double lung transplant. And I just wanted to tell everybody that it doesn't stop once you get the transplant. You know, so many things that I'd forgotten that you mentioned, one being exhaustion. You know, we can't put ourselves in the patient's body, and for all intents and purposes, we're back to normal. But when my husband sleeps till 1:30 p.m., you know, or goes to the gym and then goes back to bed, I'm just blown away thinking, what? But I'm not in his body. And so I can't thank you enough for making me wear somebody else's shoes for just this moment and think, well, you know, he's beat. And he gets compliments all the time at the gym about how much he's come back. But it isn't now, and it probably never will be what we were both doing before, but we're there. And so, you know, again, thank you.
Well, thank you for that comment. I do appreciate you sharing that, because oftentimes we forget that there is more that's after. Even though you have undergone treatment, treatment kind of continues with maintenance. So it doesn't necessarily end. And so I will often hear patients express anxiety about what that means for maintenance, and families saying, well, it's done. Like, why are you upset? Because there's still that piece of undoing or processing in the mind, and still the body is trying to catch up or maintain. And so I saw the two of you, your hand, I come to you, sir, and then over here. Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment on the guy that was talking about tracking. I read this helpful, little point about imagining we have 12 straws a day of energy. It represents our energy. And one straw could be brushing our teeth and just doing, daily activities. 2 straws could represent going to the doctor. 2 to 3 straws, going to the gym or taking a shower, exerting yourself, having family members, and kind of look at it that way and track yourself that way. And on the days that you may have bathed and went to the gym, went to the doctor, you kind of, used your energy. But some people tend to want to keep going, and then you find yourself, it puts you back. And then you said 2 weeks later, then you're finally back to where you are. So maybe pace yourself like that. That was that my thought was helpful.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
So the idea is you have so many straws, and what you say, do 3 straws and you're exhausted. Next time only do 2.5 straws.
Right, or don't do 3 straws with another 3 straws, and then go into a negative, and then, just
But
kind
you
of
can
know
look back
where
and say,
you
well,
are.
this time I was 3 straws.
Right.
And knowing your limits too.
Yeah, knowing your limits.
Did I see a hand here before? Did it go away?
Well, they pretty much
They
brought
kind of
out what I
addressed
was gonna, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so.
Thank you. Right here?
I just got an example about what she was talking about telling family members. I got 2 sons, grown. I got one son that kind of wants to know what's going on, but really doesn't want to talk about it. My younger son is one of those that if you tell him you've got something, he immediately goes to Google and will drive you nuts. He has researched everything he can research until you just say, stop. And I tend to not tell him things, or don't tell him much, because he literally does. I mean, he's a tattoo guy. So the other day we took him to something he had to go to, and he says, here's the tattoo I'm gonna get, and it's the PF awareness. It's like, don't. He goes overboard on that stuff. So, I think in some cases you have to treat family members even. You have to treat them different. And I've got one on this side and one way over here. The older son, he and his wife want to know, but he's one of those that tends to avoid really tense situations like that.
And
So-
I've seen that situation before too.
Yeah.
With the differences in the children's responses and their involvement. And so this is going to get into a little bit of a controversial idea about parenting things.
Yeah.
The idea of having children and do you raise them differently. I'm not giving any answers to that part, but it goes back to that about, some kids, you might have to be a little bit more stern with them. The other one, you tell them no once and they stop, right? So the same kind of concept. You're going to have some adult children who are caregivers or just want to just eat it all up, or just people in general who will go straight to Dr. Google and look for all the information, and then it starts to become this constant, oh, well, did you consider this? Did you consider that? And what we usually say in those cases is that try to stay away from Googling a lot of information, because you start finding out things that aren't really related to your situation, and the comparison comes in. But you have to have a conversation for that person and different for the person who stands back. The person that stands back, it could be about, well, just let me know how you're doing and what you need from me, period. It could be about fear or concern. So it's about what's underneath all of that. But then the other person also, it could be the anxiety too. And so now you have to have a different conversation to say, I'm just wondering, how are you dealing with all this? Because I noticed that you're really just jumping on in. Maybe we can find a way to help take some of that off your plate. So I still have a couple hands. Does that help, sir, here? Okay. Okay. Yes, and then I come over here.
Hi, I've been on IPR patients for about 2 years. I don't know if you hear me.
I can.
For about 2 years, I'm entering into advanced stage now, putting in for Baylor for lung transplant. But I'd like to say I've got a great support and a support structure in place. Hopefully I faith in my God. all right, and things are working out for me that way. However, I have good days and bad days. There are days that I wake up and I'll trip over my air hose, recover, destination bathroom, by the way, trip over a cat toy, utter expletives, the whole nine yards, all the while thinking of the goal of trying to reach the couch. All right, when you get there, go outside, and I'm a former public servant, so I go outside and a neighbor greets me. My personality instantly goes into public servant mode. I'm Mr. Rogers. Good morning, neighbor. Okay, I don't feel that way inside. Okay, I still feel rough, and I need advice of maybe how to overcome that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So what was said is that he recognizes that in going through this journey with your illness, that you have your good and your bad days. And you gave some explanations and examples of that. And then also finding a way to be genuine with yourself, even during those bad days, and fighting against that natural tendency to be okay. Because what we do is we placate for other people.
Yes.
Whenever you ask anybody in the hallway and passing, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. I'm good. Is everyone fine and good all the time? Probably not, because we think it's polite. It is polite, because we just tell people everything is okay. But it's not to say that you have to completely tell them everything that bothers, worries you. But I think it's okay to have some type of genuine response of, the day, it's okay, but, I'm just pushing along. Finding our own little ways to allow some of that to come out. Because if not, what it gives the impression for your body is, I'm not being honest to me, and it also may feel like you're suppressing and pushing some of that stuff in.
I just thought it was the coach, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. So there's different ways that, in session too, like when I have conversations about how do you not have this mask on literally, and I'm saying that honestly, like a mask that we wear in terms of our emotions, you just happen to have one on, but a mask that we wear and how we hide our emotions and how we can practice that. So I will actually sit there with a patient and they will say, hey, how would you respond to someone seeing you don't feel so well? Well, I've had some better days, but I'm doing okay. Like if you need to give that good and that bad, then that's okay as well. You're welcome. Thank you for your question. Now I saw a hand over here. If not, I'll come here.
I'm newly diagnosed and new on oxygen. Just sitting here, I don't need it, but if I'm out doing any activity, I need it. And we just got back from New Mexico and I need it 24/7. But we live in a community, it's real close, and a lot of people in the neighborhood, and we do all these activities together. We also have a community gym, workout facility, and that's one of the things my husband and I talked about. We need to start using it because it had just gotten built and need to get some form of exercise. Well, if I do, I'm going to have to wear my oxygen. And I haven't done that in front of anyone yet there. They don't really know there's anything wrong with me. And we had a neighbor that came in our backyard while I was out cleaning the patio and I had my oxygen on. He goes home and tells his wife, and she said, Jim said you were on oxygen, what's going on? And told her, she goes, well, you look great. You don't look like there's anything wrong with you. And it's because, yeah. Well, I've always been in that world. I have myelofibrosis and I've had it for years. I've had an MPN for 22 years. So I've always had a chronic illness. And nobody, can tell by looking at me. And so, and two, I get that all the time. We don't look sick. And so we're going to go work out, and I know we're going to have people coming in and seeing me. And it's the same thing kind of with the mask thing, that I want everyone to perceive me as a healthy person. I don't want them to see me in that and ask questions. So I don't know if I just need to make a general announcement so people won't be so shocked, or just let them ask it. I say, see, because I know they're going to ask questions, because that's our
We're not too amazed.
Yeah.
We're not amazed.
There were some pamphlets out there, and Shelley says they're still there. What to tell your friends and family. And they're real simple, but they're almost a handout, and they're really good. That way you don't have to spend 15 minutes explaining to people.
It could be, I was just thinking in my head, to educate or not educate, that is the question.
Yeah.
And where it comes down to where you could provide information to educate people about what's going on. But sometimes you don't want to be a walking billboard. You just want to go about your day and handle your business as anybody else. So one is you can decide if you want to have a little spiel that you do tell people. And that's, again, going back to practicing about what you will say should someone ask you because they notice something is different or that information comes back. I had a patient whose hometown is in a small city in South Dakota. And she was just like, I'm dreading going back home because the town is this big and everybody's going to know and everybody's going to walk up to me and ask a question. So we actually had sessions where we practiced what she was going to say. So that's one thing. Because the other is you don't owe anybody an explanation about your personal health history. And I have to remind people of that often.
Yeah.
And so that's another part. And lastly, I would say it's going to come down to you in terms of your comfort. Being newly diagnosed, this is something now that you're having to take on as part of that identity, of these identities that you have. And so figuring out what is it about that makes you comfortable or less comfortable and how to work within that space. And that might be something that you have to figure out too. But all those are just some examples of ways that you can handle it.
One thing I've observed in the last year and a half or so is the fact that with your friends and family, particularly family, there's a huge gulf between you as a patient and anybody in your family who is not a patient. And that's where I think a group like this can really help, because I can't explain about being patient, not to family, not to anything. I think you have to be there before you can actually understand it. So I don't fault anybody in the family, particularly not my wife, for not understanding what I'm feeling. And I don't always understand her feeling the way she does. I call it nagging. She calls it concern.
Concern.
It is concern.
Yeah.
I say that as a
It's
nag.
nagging too.
Well, I think it's concerned in my neighborhood because they're all real close and everybody kind of knows. They're kind of like a big family and,
You need to just tell them this is what it is and that's what it is.
Yeah.
And not worry about it.
And figure
Why
out how
should
you want the
worry
information
about
to be shared.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like getting in front of the story in a sense of figuring out how you want to share that information. But remembering that it is your information to share. I think sometimes when others come up and they ask you a question, even if I had like a real big red spot right here, like, why do you have this big, I don't have to tell you. Like, yeah, I know it's obvious, but we feel that we're put on the spot and now we have to give an explanation. That people are owed that, and in fact, not
That's what
always.
that handout
It's about
is for.
slowing
You
it
say
down.
here, that's
See, and
the way it
before I
is.
didn't feel like that because nobody can tell.
Dave's had his hand up.
Yes,
before.
oh, yes.
I was just, I'm pretty early in my diagnosis, and I'm trying to wrestle with the acceptance of this disease, and I guess what I'm resolving myself to liken it to is I'm married. I've been married for 43 years. It's just like having another wife, being married again, because you have this it that you've got that has other ideas about what you are going to do. Similar to my wife, but this it is, you don't have any control over it. And people need to understand, your family, your friends, that you don't have control over, some days you're going to be having good days, and other days it is deciding that you're not going to have a good day, and it doesn't have anything to do with you. It's it that's doing it to you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you could get it across to your friends and family that that's the way these type of diseases work. That doesn't mean that you're going to be like this forever, but you're going to be changing in and out of the good days and bad.
And I appreciate that. Thank you for being able to separate out the illness from yourself. And that's another piece that I work on with patients. You notice I said my patients with cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
This does not make you who you are.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so being able to separate the illness out from yourself. to the point where you recognize that, yeah, now you're having to navigate and manage this other thing that is happening, and it often affects what you have going on, and being able to share it in that way for yourself as well as for others.
One other thing,
I would like-
oh, go ahead, Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback on what he was saying. It's not only your situation, but it's also the medication you take. Sometimes that affect your mood, so like depression, insomnia, anxiety, and so like you got those two combinations, and sometimes it's hard to explain to your caregivers, relatives, or whatever why you're acting this way, you know. So I would like to just bring that out.
I'm glad you brought that up, because as a psychologist, that's the part that I definitely focus a lot on, because many patients come to me first because something is going on emotionally. And the providers are unsure, the family's unsure, and we don't recognize soon enough that usually it can be the medication. That some patients may have had a past history of concerns with depressed mood or anxiety, and now the presence of a stressor, such as a medical condition, can also recur those type of symptoms. Or you can now have this particular condition, and now it's leading you to feel kind of depressed or anxious. Or because of the condition, you've been prescribed medication that we have known is associated with increasing symptoms of depression and anxiety. The other thing is that there's a big stigma about mental health and seeking psychological services. So what makes my position so unique and helpful is that I'm embedded within a medical institution. I am the dedicated psychologist for the cancer center. I'm in the cancer center. So for patients who feel uncomfortable or maybe sharing for themselves or their family, they're coming up to the center like they would for any other appointment, and they also get to see me because I'm treating them comprehensively. I'm addressing the illness. I'm addressing it from a physical, psychological, emotional standpoint. And so that's something else to pick up on, because we don't recognize too is that the medications may start making your mood feel different, and people feel like, well, I'm weak. Have I lost faith? What's going on with me? And they don't seek help because now they think that puts them in a bucket of something I don't want to touch. So that's important. Thank you for that. Yes.
Just back to Patricia's comments that wearing oxygen. The first time Scott started wearing oxygen, he said, "Will you be embarrassed if I wear this oxygen? We're meeting some friends for dinner." And I was like, "No, absolutely not. And I want people to see you with oxygen and that you're going about your life just like you normally would. And, for them to understand this does not limit the person that you are in any way. He's still the same guy inside there." And it was funny, still the pain in the neck, but, it was funny that, people that see him for the first time in church with oxygen on or something like that, they won't say anything to him, but they come to me and say, "What's wrong with Scott?" Or, and I got a knee replaced and I had to walk with a cane, but they come up to me and they would say, "What happened to your knee?" or "What happened to you?" But they're reluctant, so, why is one device scarier than another?
And that's what it is. It's about what we feel comfortable addressing. But something else might, and also about our familiarity. So maybe, seeing that someone has had knee surgery is one thing, but if you don't necessarily see someone with an oxygen tank often, then you're not as comfortable addressing that.
Now, one thing I wanted to add about what you were saying is that I use wearing my oxygen to the gym, for instance, kind of like an opportunity. For instance, I met Mary Alcott at the gym, and she walked up to me and said, "What's up with the oxygen?" And, we started talking, and I found out that her husband had had a transplant, and we started sharing, and that was before Mary became a member of PF Warriors. So I was proselytizing. as my good Baptist upbringing taught me.
Yeah, and I did the same thing with Dwight. I said, "Is it going to embarrass you?" And I'd have oxygen on. I said, always before, I've always had something wrong, but nobody could tell or see it. Now they're going to see there's something wrong with me.
Develop a really short little statement that you don't mind saying.
I'm trying to picture what's with the oxygen. I've got a breathing problem.
None of your
Well,
Let it go.
there's that, and there's people that are concerned, and there's people who are just nosy.
Yeah.
And you have to learn to figure
Yeah,
out
which
which is
one's
which.
That's a good,
But
that's
it's
a
an
good,
opportunity
Good
to
point.
to tell people about pulmonary fibrosis,
Yeah.
which is a rare disease and nobody knows anything at all about.
That's true.
And we need to spread the word.
And that's what goes back to the
Let people know
whole
what it
piece
is.
about your journey and your experience. What is to be learned about this? How might others be encouraged by this? How might you share from what you're dealing with to be able to educate other people? And again, it's not like it has to be placed on you as an obligation of sorts, but do know that these are opportunities or options that you can choose should you desire to. So I know we're gonna start wrapping up on time, so thank you so much for
I
those
have
lively
one other
points.
question I wanted
And
to
we're gonna wrap up with
I'm
Scott.
just make a question. We're here talking about patients because it's most of us in the room are patients, but practically every one of the patients has a caregiver sitting beside them, and the psychological impact of this disease on the caregiver too. And I guess my question is what can the patient do to ease the burden on the caregiver?
What can the patient do to ease the burden on the caregiver?
One of them, be compliant.
Be compliant.
Yes, my love.
Everyone will say, be compliant, or we use like the word adherence because it suggests more collaboration. But doing what you need to do and then honestly asking for help when you need it. So being able to function to your capacity, but being honest about your limitations and asking for help when you need it. Because I think honestly, caregivers step in when it feels like it's an overdrive because they think that you're not asking for help. Or there's a perception that I'm being a burden, therefore I'm not going to say you. So I think that's the back and forth. And I'm actually working on some groups to support caregivers because we need it. But my last point before I wrap up now is to say, remember this, regardless of what role you play, we are all someone's patient. Whether you go to the eye doctor, your general physician, etc., or a specialist, we are all someone's patient. So I think at any given time, you can put yourself in the shoes of what that feels like to have empathy. Thank you.
Thank you.